what we call the PAD county profile. PAD is Cornell's Program in Applied Demography. Okay, the website's there. If I were you, I'd write down that address. Okay, pad.human.cornell.edu. It's out of the College of Human Ecology. Or you can access this through my website, nyruralschools.org. Well, there's the direct way. On here, you're going to see a left-hand column. Halfway down the left-hand column, you're going to see a little link called County Profiles. When you click on the county profiles, you'll see a map of New York State. You'll recognize the different counties. You'll click on a county, and a big 40-page PDF will download to your desktop or your tablet or your phone or whatever you do these days. All right? In there, you start to peer through this. So this is obviously from the St. Lawrence version of this, St. Lawrence County. You get page after page after page of really important, really timely, really interesting bits of data. Okay? And this is a promo for that. Not that it costs you anything, not that Cornell makes any money off this. That's not the point. It's that you have access to this. Okay? And it's a county profile from St. Lawrence County. Then you can go to Lewis County, Jefferson County. You pick your county and download whatever you want. Okay? And you can go through and look at the story of your county today, looking back over time. There's historical trends. Okay? And there's all kinds of bits of information on there. But even this, a little color-coded map, you can see where the population is increasing, where the population is decreasing in the subunits of the county here. Okay, so this is like an extra bonus prize just for coming today. You can download this thing. It's free. You can pass it to your neighbors. You can email it to your neighbors. But it should become really required reading. And it's not a lot of text. It's all stuff like this. Really, really useful. The next meeting you're going to, bring it along. It'll impress them. You got all this data. But to it there may be information here it's really, really quite useful to particular questions that come up. Okay. One issue that we deal with the schools all the time, okay, is the financing of schools. And I could not agree more with the comments a little while, David's comments a few minutes ago, that the hope that we're going to have this windfall of money coming in, okay, for hospitals or for schools, I don't see that happening at all, okay? In order for that to happen, you're going to need to get Westchester County and Long Island and other counties down there to say, oh, we'll cut our state aid by 10, 20%, and we'll give that to the North Country. That ain't happening. Okay? Political representation of state is weighted more and more and more downstate as the population slides down. Okay? So the notion that we're going to get a whole lot more money, not going to happen. So how we distribute the money is really, really important in the foundation formula. Tom Burns went through this earlier. He mentioned the combined wealth ratio. The combined wealth ratio is made up of two different variables. One is your income per pupil. It's the average household income per pupil, okay, in a school district. And the bottom one is the property wealth per pupil. So the total taxable property wealth per pupil. And they mush these together in some unintelligible ways. And they come up with this ratio with a mean of 1, okay? If we look up top here, this is your county, St. Lawrence County. We have the green line is probably the best to look at, although we have high need rural districts are in the blue line. The average need districts are in the red line. But the blue line, just to keep it simple, the blue line there. We went from back around under $40,000 average household income back in 1993, as far back as our data goes. Okay? And that has steadily increased. And you look at that and you think, wow, not bad. There's been growth in income. And it's up to, $80,000 average household income. Property wealth. Started at $100,000 of total taxable property wealth per pupil back then. And now we're up over $200,000 of total taxable property wealth per kid. This is what we tax. And this is how we get our checkbooks to pay that tax, if you will. All right? And if you do a little calculation of a basic typical tax rate of $20 per thousand of assessed value, right here, okay, you get about $4,000 per kid in local tax revenue. On average, a pretty crude number, and your tax rate might be higher than that, might be lower, but at roughly $20. So remember, can you write down that number? $4,000 per kid? Thank you. Okay. Can you write down $80,000 per kid as far as the income wealth goes? Thank you. Okay, now let's look statewide. All right, and what we have here are different lines for different ways that the state always categorizes school districts. You got New York City, you got the big four, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Yonkers. Small cities in the beige kind of line. The blue is the high need rural. Black average need, and the red, actually more of a maroonish, the top line, are the low need districts, the wealthy communities. Okay? Over time, high need rurals, which are the majority of school districts around this area, again, we're back there at around $40,000. Average household income is increased to, what do we say, $80,000? Okay? Look at this concentration of wealth for income, okay? You see what happened in the wealthy communities. Their average household income is pushing $250,000 now. That's the ability to get a check out and write a check for your taxes, okay? The red line's New York City. This is the income. Let's look at property wealth. The geographic concentration of wealth, and we always hear about the concentration of wealth in a few people's hands, the top 1%, okay? I don't know if there's any 1%ers in here, but you often don't find many 1%ers outside of New York City, or at least the 1/2 of 1%ers. But the low-need districts, the wealthy communities, which we know are geographically where they're located, and I can show you a map on that. Property value averaged $600,000 per kid back in the day. It was quite flat for a while, and during the 2000s, skyrocketed, okay? So if you hold the same tax rate this whole time, the same $20 per thousand of assessed value, and your assessed value goes from $500,000 up to well over $1 million, okay? That tax rate's gonna get you a whole lot more money. And if we do our little calculation down here, okay, we have about $20,000 per pupil of locally derived tax dollars. Up here, roughly speaking, is about $4,000. And this is why the state contributes more money here than they do the wealthy areas. But do they contribute enough here relative to the wealthy areas? That's another conversation. Okay, so what I'm trying to show here is where things looked okay here in absolute terms. In relative terms, we're really, really, really falling behind. These communities down here, I'm sorry, these communities up here, okay, the opportunities they're giving their kids with 4, 5, 6 different foreign languages in middle school, okay, and all the rest that you've heard about and wondered about, all the rest, okay, that doesn't get published very often, doesn't get talked about very often. And downstate legislators get very, very prickly when you talk about this. But and these are the kids that our kids are competing with, okay? In some ways, I'm going to come back to the localized labor markets later on. Okay. Now, slightly different topic. The importance of a school to a community, okay? We call this school reorganization, school consolidation, school closure, all these different terms on this. Hot button issue, if you're a superintendent, you ever want to get fired, you go close an elementary school. Hard to survive that, okay? Engage in a merger, one of the two superintendents certainly will lose their job, okay? But there's a gentleman, Tom Lyson, a former colleague of mine who's now deceased, published a study about a decade ago that caught fire, and it's amazing how this little article with just a little bit of data convinced a lot of people that every bit of this is true. And it may be true. It may be. But when you talk to many, many people in rural areas, not just in New York State, but across the country, they'll pull out the license paper and say, if I close a school building, that town is going to die. Can't do it. I know we're running these different inefficient schools. If I close down the building, the community is going to die. I'm trying to pose this as an empirical question. How true is that? Under what conditions is that true? Because if we take it totally as face value, we'll never close another school again. Because those communities will die. Now, when I was meeting with the planners, when I was here a few weeks ago, they mentioned Madrid-Waddington. I'm not familiar with Madrid-Waddington, and some of you can correct the story if you want. Madrid used to have their school. Waddington used to have their school. New York State used to have 10,000 school districts, okay? Long time ago. Consolidation, merger took place, okay? Through some state regulation and so forth and incentivizing it, the new building was built in between the two communities, okay? Not on any of either Main Street, okay? Now every kid had to be bused versus many kids walking, okay? And as the story was relayed to me, both Main Streets have died. They don't have their school, okay? There's all kinds of anecdotal evidence that this is the case. There's also anecdotal evidence where if a building can be repurposed for another function, okay, put back in the tax rolls, a community can actually prosper from having a school closed. But that doesn't take place too often. That doesn't get talked about very often. So let's look at that. But these are these hypotheses that Lyson laid out. You can agree, you can disagree, but let's try to bring some data to the conversation, okay? And Tom, in his paper, using 1990 census data, was pretty persuasive that those villages of 2,500 citizens and smaller that had a school building present were much more economically viable, much more socially active than those villages of comparable makeup that did not have a school building. And amongst those villages of 500 kids or 500 people, 500 citizens and smaller, these smallest villages around, okay, the school was the most important to that type village. Okay, a little bit of data. Small with school, when I say small, that's villages. You know what a village is defined as. Villages is of 500 or fewer people. Okay, that's the left side. With a school and then without a school. So right here, in 1990 is the red line. You had nearly 40 small villages with school buildings. By 2000, you're down to probably 23, 24, and a little bit lower in 2010. So 3 waves of data here. 1990, 2000, 2010, and you see the drop. You see the increase here of the small without schools, as you might expect. Large, which is between 500 and 2,500 population. A lot more of them had schools back in 1990, and then a little more stable since. So a big change between 1990 and 2000 as far as the number of villages with schools or without schools. Uh-oh. What did I do?
Yeah. Did I already get that?
Okay. I apologize for the slide, okay? But you all know what it is. It's a map of New York State with a bunch of little colored dots on it, and you can't see them. So what do you take from this? What you should take from this right now, and I'll try to cook up a better version in the future and get it in your hands. Up top, the blue are non-rural villages in 2000 that became rural villages in 2010. So these are villages that shrunk. They had more than 2,500 and dropped down below 2,500, okay? The red ones are the rural villages that became non-rural in 2010. So these ones that grew. You were 2,500 and got bigger than 2,500. The purple are those that were rural both, 2,500 and less in both waves. And then the triangles are where a school is if it's inside one of these villages. So the trick with a map is that you put a black triangle on it, covers up the color of the village. Sorry. Okay, but all I'm trying to show you here is that there's a broad distribution, and you can see where we are up here, of where these schools, where the communities are, which are small, villages of 2,500 or less, how randomly they're kind of located around the state. And some of them have triangles on them, some of them don't. Some have schools, some don't. Okay. Median, we often think, what is a measure of community vitality? How are we going to know if a community is more vital or less vital? Is it in decline or getting better, getting healthier? Okay. And so we look at median house price as one option. And we've got a million different variables in the paper on this. What we see here, though, are the dotted lines are those communities with schools. And the solid lines are those communities without schools. And we've got from 1990 to 2000 to 2010. So what you see here is what I call the stabilizing effect of having a school. So if you have a school in a village over these 3 decades, the housing prices don't change. These are adjusted for inflation, $1990. So the absolute, kind of the value of that, by and large, hasn't changed. It's pretty flat. So one could argue schools really help a community stay stable, the presence of a school. And we can talk about why that might be. Well, there's jobs in the jobs there, or foot traffic, or whatever it may be. People want to live near a school. A whole variety of reasons for that. But down here, notice, these were the large, I'm sorry, this is the small with no school and the small with a school. The steady increase in the housing values of those communities. So over the last 20 years, if you didn't have a school, your housing values increased, adjusting for inflation. So is a school good for the community or not? I argue they create a stability in a community, but the flip side of stability might be constraint. I'm not trying to get shot up here. I'm not trying to get into too many arguments, but what I want is to have a broader conversation about this. And if you're having a conversation about regionalizing high schools, closing elementary buildings, closing high schools, merging, the conversation needs to be much more enriched than just if you close the school, the community is going to die. Okay? Because we all know these communities are a bit different, and there's unique attributes around the board. Oops. Household income. Let's look at household income. A reasonable measure. If everyone's household income is going up, probably some sign that the community is doing okay. Okay? Again, dotted lines are where we have schools, and the solid lines where there's no schools. And you take a peek at that, you try to make sense of this, and what you see is during the first decade, if you didn't have a school, the incomes dramatically went up. Exactly why? A lot of entrepreneurialism, new business coming in, businesses taking over where the school building used to be. Who knows? Okay, something going on. But then, of course, the big drop when the world changed last decade. So this volatility. Okay? And where the schools are, it's a bit more stable. So how do you interpret that? We can talk about that. Okay, now this is going to make your eyes glaze over. But I apologize. But at least I'm honest about it. At least I'm upfront about it, okay? What we see here is a whole series of regression models. These are 6 different outcome variables, the 2 different years, and then household income are the first 2 columns, per capita income, and then household values. What Lyson didn't do was do anything what we call multivariate analysis. He was all just looking at 2 variables at a time, like the charts I just showed you, 2 variables at a time. Once you start controlling for other variables, we wondered what would happen. So let's look at this. The proportion of this is census data. So the proportion of white-collar jobs in your community, the greater the proportion of white-collar jobs, the higher your incomes, individual and household, and the higher your household values. That shouldn't surprise anybody. Like you're thinking, here's another bozo professor telling us what we already know, and he's getting paid to do this? Are you kidding me? Okay. Well, we got to control for that. If you're the greater proportion of self-employment, and here's where it starts to get interesting. Greater proportion of self-employment in any given village, 20% to 30%, 30% to 50%, okay? Income rises, household values rise. Probably not a surprise, okay? Now, you start shifting from a school-based economy, okay, to a more of an entrepreneurial economy, you can sort of see where that comes from, okay? Now, that being said, less than 39, the proportion of the population that's under 40, as that increases, so you have the proportion of your population, so the younger your county is, the younger your village is, has a negative, depressing effect on income and household values. Shouldn't surprise you at all. Who makes more, older people or younger people? By and large, older people. Okay, so that shouldn't be a surprise. The nice thing here is that above and beyond the effect of the age structure, above and beyond that effect, and above and beyond the effect of these other things, the greater proportion of households with children, this is distinct from age, it's above and beyond the effect of age, proportion of kids with the households with children actually has a helpful effect here. Now, the trick then becomes, how do we get more families with children into our community? And there lies the question. But there's some data to say it's worth doing it if you can do it. Okay? Up top, presence or absence of a school building. Household values doesn't seem to make any difference. Per capita income doesn't seem to make any difference. Household income, it does have a significant and positive effect. Notice also for large, whether it's a large community or small community, if you're 500 people or less, or 2,500 to 500, does that impact your income and housing values and so forth? It doesn't seem to make any difference once you control for these other issues. And this gets a little tedious, I understand, but this is really, really interesting. School by size, it's an interaction effect. Okay? Is there an equal effect of school on large communities versus small communities? And the answer is no. There's a negative effect here, meaning the school has a more profound effect on the smaller communities and has a reduced effect on the larger communities. So now you're thinking, okay, let's make sense of this. Here's the trick. It appears as if the presence or absence of a school building doesn't have a huge profound effect once you control for these other issues. Now, there's all kinds of causality issues. It may be that people with more kids, people with white-collar jobs, people who are self-employed, may move more towards those communities with school buildings. We can't determine that from this analysis. But what we can determine from this analysis is while the presence or absence of a school may not make too much of a difference, we know it has a bigger effect in the smallest communities. The very communities that would be argued against, the governor would argue, we need to shut down those little tiny buildings and move the kids over. Okay? So this is the conundrum. The very schools where it probably makes the most sense to consolidate from an educational standpoint, there may be a cautionary tale here. Okay? Now, there's no clean story, there's no clean answer. Lyson had a clean answer. What I'm trying to give you is that you need to do some of these local analyses as you're going through these conversations, okay? To understand whether closing the building will actually increase property values or hurt them. Because if you close a building and you decrease all your property values, you're going backwards with your ability to levy taxes and so forth. So, okay, onward. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'll be quick here. Universal pre-kindergarten. A school lever, a school policy lever, okay? Everyone knows that it's all about the schools and so forth, and that if a school takes a grant from the state made all these grants available, okay, and a school can take that grant and run a universal pre-K program as long as minimally 10% of that program, 10% of the dollars, are subcontract to a community-based organization. That's the school program. How would that impact a community? Well, in fact, quick little anecdote will give you one of, I'm sure, 1,000 different stories. True story. Superintendent of a district I won't mention, not in this area, took a grant to run UPK. Great, starting up UPK. There's one community-based organization, meaning one mom and pop, it was like the Fuzzy Duckling or something, I forget the name of it, okay, in the community that was educating, you like that? That was caring for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. Infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. Superintendent thought with her staff, well, we'll take the 4-year-olds. This will help the CBO, the Fuzzy Duckling, so they can just focus on their infants and toddlers. And we'll provide a nice service to the community so these kids can come to our school for free for their pre-K program. Within a year, the Fuzzy Duckling just about went out of business. Just about gone. when the head of the Fuzzy Duckling went to the superintendent and said, "You've put us out of business." Superintendent said, "How?" It's more expensive to care for an infant than it is a 4-year-old. If you take the 4-year-olds out of that building, out of that room, who are really, the tuition is subsidizing the infants and toddlers, you're going to put them out of business. The conversation didn't take place. My point is, the conversation in one community that had one CBO and one superintendent and one director of PreK, the conversation didn't take place. I could see this in Buffalo or New York City, where there's 1 million actors. This particular community, one person to talk to, and they didn't do it. Okay? Local conversations, cross-sector conversations, really, really important. Real quick, this is the take-up rate, actually the proportion of 4-year-olds in any given community that are served by universal pre-K. Okay? Notice at the top, the big cities, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Yonkers, started way back in 1998, more than 50% served, okay? And they're practically, at 90%. Served in the state-funded universal pre-K. High-need rural is now the beige line. Sorry for the change in colors. We started way back in 1998, very, very low, about 12%. 12% of all 4-year-olds had access to this pre-K. Very, very low. Skyrocketed. This is a real success story from the state. Okay? Over 60% of kids, of 4-year-olds now are accessing pre-K in these high-need rural areas. But let's look at infants and toddlers. Because if you're going to develop a labor force, you're going to allow young parents to access the labor market or be an entrepreneur. Daycare, really, really important. Okay? Daycare for an infant, toddler, pre-K for a 4-year-old. Infants in the Big Four, we have about 13% of infants served in the Big Four. Not much, 13%. The high-need rurals, about 5 or 6%. Okay, so the slots available for an infant age kid 0 to 18 months. Okay, much lower here. Toddlers, the gap grows even farther. So if you're a young parent and want a place for your toddler to be well cared for during the day, okay, it's an issue to think about as far as enhancing the local economy and community action and so forth. Preschool here, it's we're still nowhere near where the small cities are, the high-need suburbs and cities. But you see the difference right there. So different things to think about as far as enhancing the well-being. Okay. In a community that has, these are small cities across the state of New York. In a community that has no UPK program, you don't have to take this. Some school districts don't take it. If you don't take UPK, about 4% of infants are served, 12% of toddlers, and a huge percent of preschoolers. There's an inefficiency here. Where there are communities with UPK, okay, 14% of infants are served. Notice, the state's not paying for infant care. The state's not paying for toddler care. The state's paying for pre-K, okay? But it has this relation, it has this effect on serving younger kids. So this is all kind of linked together, okay? And you see where the 23% of toddlers. High-need rurals, okay? Doesn't seem to matter too much if you take pre-K or not, the UPK grant. We're at 3% and 5%, 5%, 7%. But if you cut it this way, if you're a young parent trying to, and you're interested in joining the labor market, interested in finding a place for your child to be cared for, okay, in the rural areas, the rates of access to these are much, much lower. Oh, let's move through that. Okay. Last one, and then we'll move on. Okay. Or I'll shut up after this last one. Okay. Another way to think about the vitality of your community, the investment in the schools, to get the healthcare community, working with the school community, working with the business community, to enhance the productivity of the schools, is the very local labor market of teachers. I don't have data on other careers. I don't know if this would hold true for nursing. I don't know if this would hold true for physicians or other areas. But for teachers, a St. Lawrence grad has done this study, is at the University of Vermont now, one of my former PhD students, Kieran Colleen, proud St. Lawrence grad, St. Lawrence U grad. Look at what they found, okay? Now, this is using Vermont data, but there's no great reason to think that Vermont functions differently from upstate New York as far as teacher labor markets. And real quick, 75% of all offers made, the variable here is offers made to a candidate for a job, whether it's math or kindergarten, whatever it may be. 75% of the offers are made to people who live within 38 miles of that school. 78%, 75%. 50% of all people who are getting job offers in schools live within 17 miles, okay? And 25% are within 7 miles. That's an incredibly localized labor market. So if you think about generationally, if you want to enhance and have your kids taught by the best and brightest, and we know that 3/4 of them are going to be coming from your most immediate region of the teachers, you better pay attention to the education of those kids as they become adults and take on teaching jobs. There's some that come from 200 miles away, but they're the exception, okay? Most teachers, and study after study has shown this, very localized labor markets for teachers, okay? So it matters. Okay. What to do? Next steps, and we'll talk about this afternoon, okay? One thing you need, if you're going to be involved in these conversations, is not to call me up and have me tell you what to do, okay? That's not going to help you very much. What do I know, okay? I certainly don't know the intricacies of your local community, the politics, the finances, and all the rest. What can we do for you? We can provide easy access to data that otherwise is very, very hard to do. And so we end up guessing around certain issues, guessing around enrollment trends, guessing around future financial projections, guessing what the state aid is if we merge school buildings, okay? Data is always better than guessing, okay? Local and regional analysis and planning, okay? This notion that we can't, going this alone in your local community, exceedingly hard, much more regional conversation, which is why this group is so important, critical. Okay? Demographics and enrollment. What are happening to demographics? Somebody said demographics cannot be our destiny.